Welcome everybody to Xtreme Topics episode 5. I'm your co-host Mr. X. Xtreme Topics, if this is your first time tuning in, first thank you very much. What we do on this show is we discuss pertinent topics within the statue collecting industry. And today is equally special. Not only is our 5th episode, but my co-host who usually joins me, Mr. Richard Ryder, he usually joins me via webcam. He is here. He is in the Xtreme Mancave. He is going to be joining us today. Super excited to have him. And first time I've ever met him, but this is going to be interesting. So let's get running with Xtreme Topics, episode 5. Welcome everybody to Xtreme Topics, episode 5. My name is Mr. X, and this is my co-host, Richard Ryder.
Sorry, Mr. X.
Dick?
I am just in awe. This place is statue collecting heaven.
Well, thanks, Dick. I'm glad.
Can I move in?
How about no?
Sorry, Dick, that's just not going to happen. But it's great to finally meet you in person. What the hell is that smell, man?
Sorry, that was me. But it's amazing to meet you in person, Mr. X. Can I call you that?
What else would you call me?
My hero.
This is awkward. Well, let's get on with the show. Before we do, it's an interesting note that our Xtreme Topic episodes are actually our most thumbs down video.
What? No, that's impossible.
Personally, I think it's because of you.
It is not.
I think so.
It's you.
Nope, it's you.
It's you times infinity.
Well, anyway, today is a very important topic we're going to cover that many of our viewers have been asking us to, have been requesting us to speak about. So people are really curious about the statue process, how a statue comes to be from A to Z.
Great idea, Mr. X. I know so much about this topic. I'm an expert.
Well, I'm sure you are.
I don't like your tone.
Now, while things are similar in the license and custom world, for the most part, there's a little bit of difference, but specifically today, we're going to talk about how customs are made.
We can't talk about this. Are you freaking kidding me, Mr. X?
No, Dick. We're going to discuss the entire custom process from beginning to end.
No, I'm not going to do it. I won't be a part of this travesty.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, Dick, but I think this information is extremely
no
useful
longer
for our
my
viewers.
hero.
Well, it looks like I'm going to discuss this topic by myself in this episode, unless you want to participate, Dick.
Nope, not going to do it.
Okay, so how do customs... Oh, you're participating now? So how does this process work with customs? First, I want to throw out some traditional disclaimers we do in every video. Number one is we're going to go over some generalities of the process about producing a custom piece. Every custom is a little bit different, some commissioners, some groups, but this is going to be more of a general style. Disclaimer number 2, I am not an expert, just sharing the knowledge that I have, so if I get something wrong, sue me. And disclaimer number 3, based off the first 2 disclaimers, producing a custom or a licensed piece is extremely difficult and it's very risky, aka don't try this at home. So before we begin, I think it's important to describe what we're actually referring to when we say custom statue. Within the statue community, custom generally refer to an unlicensed piece.
Which means it is illegal.
Yes, that is technically true. So the copyrighted entity, whether it's Marvel or DC or Universal or likeness on an actor, hasn't given permission for anyone else to use that character. So the person producing it hasn't paid royalties, license fees, or even has the approval of the licensing entity. Traditionally, licensing entities want to control the production of their own pieces for two reasons. Number one is, first, they want to make sure that the product is accurate and tasteful in the way that they want it to be. And they want to make sure that the character is created, if it's made by somebody else, truly represents what they originally had in mind. And the second reason is pretty obvious. They want their money, greedy bastards. So now that we've clarified that, let's talk about the roles traditionally involved in a custom project. There are generally 5 different roles, and when I say roles, I don't necessarily mean people. 5 different roles mean positions that need to be filled, and sometimes one person can play more, if not all of those roles. So keep that in mind. So role number 1 when creating a custom piece is an art director. This is the person that kind of comes up with the concept and the idea. And they're involved in the entire process because it's kind of like seeing their vision come to fruition. They direct the creation of the piece, working closely with all the different roles involved. Now, role number 2 we're going to talk about is the sculptor. So obviously they come up with a concept, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. The art director comes up with the concept. The sculptor, pretty self-explanatory. They sculpt the piece. Traditionally, for the most part, it's done digitally now. However, some sculpts are traditional, and they are directed by the art director as that sculpt comes to be. And as you can imagine, sculptors have had a lot of experience, so they participate in the art direction a little bit as well, if not a lot. Third role is the commissioner. So the commissioner is involved with every aspect in every role, but traditionally the commissioner has 3 main areas of responsibility. Responsible number 1, they're kind of like the boss. They direct everything, and they're responsible that everything works together and there's cohesion. So they're kind of overseeing the entire process, kind of like a project manager, so to say. Number 2, traditionally, commissioners financially back the project. So it's not cheap, and there's significant risk, which we will talk about. But in my opinion, a commissioner shouldn't start a project unless they are ready to lose all the money. There's that much of a risk to it, especially when creating custom statues. Number 3 is they deal with all the customers, every aspect. They do sales, they do collections, they communicate, they give updates. So they're that main focal point of contact for the entire project for all their customers. So that kind of sums up role number 3, the commissioner. Role number 4 is the master painter. So typically we have somebody very similar to a sculptor. However, they paint the prototype piece so the factory can use it as reference when they are doing factory paint on all the other pieces. Every once in a while, a factory also includes this in their services, so you may not need a master painter, which we will talk about. And speaking of the factory, that is role number 5. You need a factory and a point of contact at that factory that will run things and actually produce the statue. Again, we're going to get into more detail about it. So that's kind of the summary of the 5 roles. And sometimes there's a miscellaneous role, and this may be a helper that helps drive sales, communicate with customers who may or may not have any financial backing in the project. Who knows? But those are kind of the 5 main roles we run into.
This is unbelievably wrong.
So now that we know the different roles involved, let's talk about the actual process. So keep in mind, depending on different factors, sometimes some steps may supersede others, but for the most part, this is how the process goes. And we're going to start with step number 1, and step number 1 is concept is created. So traditionally, as we said, this is by the art director. There's a lot more, and it's a lot more difficult than you think. So first you have to come up with a character and a concept that does 2 things. It has to be unique, otherwise it won't sell. If it's a copy or something similar, it's probably not going to sell a lot. And second, it has to be popular. And those things contradict each other. You have to come up with something that's very unique and something that's popular. There's a reason there's 50 different Venoms out there and Wolverines, and there's no Lady Deathstrikes or Pyros yet, because they're not popular characters, even though they haven't been done. So it's a very difficult thing to find that perfect balance. So the art director will have something in their mind, and they generally will create some type of drawing or sketch, or some art directors start digitally sculpting it to give the sculptor a starting point for direction. Many groups, the commissioner is actually the art director. That is typically the case, to be honest with you. However, in some cases where there is a sole art director, they are typically compensated in a few different ways for the project. First, typically the art director, as well as most of the people involved, receive a free production piece of the statue. So they get compensation that way. This is a very shared practice, like I said, for all the 5 different roles we talked about. Almost every person involved, minus the factory, receives a free statue, usually a production piece. A lot of times that's where the artist proof go. Some art directors also receive additional compensation in the form of Benjamins, the monies. So sometimes they're going to get an additional anywhere from $200 to $1,000 and up on top of that free statue. So that kind of gives you a cost perspective of an art director. So step number 2 is the actual sculpt of the piece. This is where the art director works really closely with the sculptor, and they kind of, feed back and forth on creating the sculpt. And nowadays, the majority of it is done via digital sculpts. So depending on the changes of the piece throughout the process, the sculptor's availability, their efficiency, their talent, this can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months to create. And many times during this process, the entire concept may change as new things develop. Maybe a competitor comes up with something similar. Maybe they figure out a better idea. Maybe they figure out that their original concept isn't going to be liked by a lot of buyers. So they'll typically start sculpting a bare bones to eventually focus on details from eyebrows to texture to muscles. And when it's finally finished, the sculptor will create a 3D render with color. And cost on a sculptor, especially a digital sculptor, usually have a fee of the free statue. Like I said, happens kind of with every role. And a digital sculpt will cost anywhere from $2,000 to $15,000. And that large price gap is dependent on the complexity of the sculpt, the sculptor's name and recognition. As you can imagine, there's certain sculptors out there that are highly sought after. You get what you pay for. So with that proven work and proven pieces, they will charge more and they will get more. Step number 3 is the 3D print. So traditionally, the digital sculpt file is sent to the factory, who will have to do a few different things. Some factories price every item separately, and some items do everything all-inclusive. This is what it's going to cost for us to do everything. So the first thing they have to do is some engineering. This means that they take the digital sculpt and they figure it out where they're going to chop it up at. Have you ever wondered, how do they decide, okay, there's 6 different pieces to this statue, the arms are cut here?
I've always wondered that.
Were you going to contribute something, Dick?
No.
Well, so the cost of this process is typically only a few $100s and up, depending on the complexity of the piece. This is called the engineering of the statue, the cutting of it. And they do it on the actual digital file. After the cuts are determined, they're going to do a 3D print, which is exactly what you think it is. They use a high-end 3D printer to create a 3D print that will prep for the casting and molding process. A 3D print will take a factory anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months, again depending on the complexity and the capabilities of the factory. Typically a 3D print will cost a commissioner anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000, again depending on the complexity in the factory. And all of this will lead to the next step. Step number 4 is actually creating the prototype. So the factory will use that 3D print to create a mold and then create a cast for a prototype. Not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but suffice to say, if you don't have the right equipment, it is extremely difficult. Sometimes with the right equipment, it's even extremely difficult with the amount of detail they're trying to catch on statues. So the factories then use that cast for a prototype kit. So essentially it's a kit, it's the first one made, and it's a prototype, as in an unpainted statue. That's what kit means if you were unaware. This process is very similar on the timeline to the 3D print, anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months depending on a number of factors. And the price tag for the actual prototype, again, is very similar. It's another $2,000 to $5,000 depending on the different factors we've discussed. Step number 5 is actually pretty easy, but it takes a while. So getting the kit prototype painted. As I indicated in the beginning when we talked about the roll, some factories actually offer this service. They have master painters on staff that will paint the prototype for the commissioner. However, many custom commissioners insist on having a master painter outside the factory for a number of reasons. First, they can actually look at the piece in person or have someone they trust look at the piece and make sure that the casting process captured all those little details, and that when they do the production pieces, it'll follow the original prototype. Second, they can have an expert who paints the greatest detail possible. Sometimes you just trust somebody more, you've used them in the past. This is of particular importance as the factory painters will use this piece as a reference for all the production pieces. And as you can imagine, not all the painters in a factory are master painters. So a master painter typically takes around a month to paint a prototype piece depending on factors, and they're usually going to charge a free statue and anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s. The other cost that's inlaid with that is typically the commissioner will have to pay shipping. So the prototype, which is usually in China, not always, but usually in China, you got to pay a couple $100s to have that shipped to the painter, and then a couple $100s to ship back to the factory. And nowadays with shipping prices, it can be more than a couple $100s. So this next step is called Step X.
I can't believe I wasn't an X fan.
The reason this is labeled as Step X is this takes place at different stages depending on the commissioner and the project. So Step X is selling the pieces. I've seen commissioners sell pieces before they even have created or released the concept. This is obviously typically a commissioner who are highly sought after, that make successful pieces all the time. I've seen pieces sell out before the concept is even revealed, which is crazy, but it's true. Then some commissioners will wait until the end, until they have that painted prototype in place before putting pieces up for sale. And of course, there are some commissioners that projects, they put it up for sale in between some of those steps. Sometimes they sell very good after the concept is revealed, but a lot of times they sell really well when the prototype is painted because people see it, it's tangible, and they get excited and they know that the quality is going to be good. So it varies, but every group requires what we call an NRD. This is the same with licensed pieces. And it's usually 10 to 40% total of the price of the piece. And I think you can understand why they want all those costs up front. I mean, we're already at anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000 that the commissioner has invested in the actual pieces, and they haven't even paid for production yet. So if they throw out, if they plan to create 40 custom pieces and nobody ends up paying, then they're stuck with, tens and tens of thousands of dollars in inventory. So the NRD, it kind of locks people in. Step number 6 is actually producing the pieces. While this seems the most simplistic, it's probably the most difficult to execute, but we're going to break it down simplistically for you guys. So first, the factory will then start creating production pieces. They'll start creating casts based off the molds they have of the engineered cut pieces. They are going to clean them, they're going to sand them as needed, they're going to add things like lights and magnets and pegs and everything that's missing. And then they're going to start painting them based off of the master painter's sample. QC occurs during this process. They're going to examine each piece closely, hopefully, and they are going to make sure everything fits, put every statue together, take it apart, try all the switch outs, and then they create custom packaging and do drop tests. You've seen that where they throw it way up in the air, and somehow our local carriers still break it, which just amazes me. So it's a lot more complicated than that, but I think you guys kind of get the gist of it. And a factory will usually charge anywhere from $300 to $1,000 per production piece. So if you may be thinking, well, they only cost $300 and I'm being charged $1,000, that's a smaller, simplistic piece, first of all. Second of all, you forget about all the other costs we talked about earlier. Giving away free statues to each piece, sculpt, shipping, painter, digital print, prototype, all that really goes into it. And of course, the higher the ES, the lower that factory production price is. So when you have an ES of like 5,000, obviously you get a sweet deal. If you buy in bulk, you get things cheaper.
Are we done with this blasphemy?
Yeah, yes, Dick. We are done.
Finally.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I want to thank my co-host, Dick, for being here. I really hope you enjoyed it.
I didn't.
Well, hopefully this gives you some insight and knowledge into the custom world of statue collecting and some appreciation for it too. As a reminder, licensed statue process really isn't that much different. If you enjoyed this, please go ahead and hit that subscribe, as we have a lot of exciting things coming up for the channel. So until next time, this is Mr. X and Dick Ryder signing off. Take care.